trouble with that here hearing it.
Okay.
Can you repeat that, Mr. Bannon?
I'm sorry. What I said is this letter was written on April 28th, which was a week after the second meeting that he had with Dr. Meehan, where Dr. Meehan, I believe his testimony yesterday was, offered to write the report that Mr. Nifong was requesting, and Mr. Nifong asked him not to write it at that time, that he'd get back to him when he wanted him to write it.
Okay.
That's much better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In that second paragraph, you're discussing the DNA. Can you read the last two sentences, please, starting with accordingly?
Accordingly, we renew our request under Section 15A-282 to be provided with the results of any such test as soon as you are provided with the results as mandated by law. If the results have already been provided to your office, we can certainly arrange for someone from our office to pick them up today.
And so this letter put Mr. Nifong on notice that you were requesting both oral and written reports that he had received on this testing.
Yes.
Did you receive any oral report or any information from Mr. Nifong at any point about oral reports he had received from Dr. Meehan?
No.
What's paragraph 3? What is the information that you're conveying on to Mr. Nifong in that section?
Well, would you like me to read it or?
No, just talk about what the context was and what you're trying to convey.
Well, on April the 21st, which was also a week before this letter, we received typewritten, I guess, report transcript of the PowerPoint photo identification procedures that the police had engaged in with Ms. Mangum on April the 4th. In that transcript was reflected an exchange with Ms. Mangum. We had not yet received video at that point in time of any of this, which we later got, but the transcript reflected that apparently when she observed the picture of our client Dave Evans, that her response was something along the lines of, "He looks like one of the guys who assaulted me, sort of." And then there was a follow-up question about, well, how do you mean sort of? And she said, well, it would look like him if he had a mustache.
I'm sorry. What, after you got that report, did you do anything in terms of responding to that supposed identification by Ms. Mangum?
Yes.
Okay. What did you do?
Well, that was part of this. Well, first of all, there was at the end of that exchange, the officer clarified, so you're saying the person that assaulted you had a mustache? And she said yes. So obviously, we took steps to try to obtain independent evidence that Dave Evans did not have a mustache on the night of March the 13th. We obtained that evidence, and this letter was an attempt to try to communicate that and sit down with Mr. Nifong and talk to him about that.
Okay, and that's in the third paragraph there?
Yes.
Where you say you have indisputable photographic evidence that he did not have a mustache?
Yes.
And what type of evidence did you actually have of him not having a mustache?
A photograph, a digitally timestamped photo with embedded metadata on either side of that night. There was not an actual photograph of Dave Evans from that night, but there were two photographs that were on either side of that night with embedded metadata, which clearly showed that he didn't have a mustache before or after.
Did you, with this letter, did you provide any other evidence or information that you believe demonstrated Mr. Evans' innocence?
Yes.
And what was that generally?
We provided Mr. Nifong with a copy of a polygraph examination that we had administered to Mr. Evans. As you'll recall, he had offered to the Durham Police Department to take a polygraph on the night of March 16th. They did not take him up on that offer, so we did. And we retained Bob Durdak, who a lot of folks in law enforcement around here in North Carolina and nationally know. He's one of the preeminent experts in the nation on polygraphs and the administration of polygraphs, and we asked him, he's based in Charlotte, and we asked him if he would administer a polygraph examination to Dave.
Okay, and did he do that?
Yes.
And did you set forth Mr., I'm sorry, how do you pronounce his name?
Durdak.
Durdak. Did you set forth his credentials in primarily on page 2 of that letter as to who had actually administered the test
Yes.
and what his background was in terms of being former FBI and other credentials?
Yes.
And did you provide Mr. Nifong with a summary of the results in the letter?
Yes.
And what generally did those results show?
Well, I mean, if I could just read from the letter.
Sure.
Last Friday, April 21st, 2006, Bob performed a polygraph examination of Dave Evans in 2 series. In the first series, Dave was asked whether he was involved directly or indirectly in a physical or sexual assault of the alleged victim in the above referenced matter. In the second series, Dave was asked whether he was or is withholding any personal knowledge of any such assault. He answered no to all questions, and Mr. Durdak concluded that the examination strongly supports the truthfulness of Mr. Evans concerning the relevant questions.
Okay. And did you just summarize the report, or did you actually provide Mr. Nifong a copy of the actual report of the polygraph exam?
We provided him with a copy of it.
And that's attached to the letter in Exhibit 213?
Yes, sir.
After you discuss or convey on to Mr. Nifong the results of that polygraph test, tell me generally what the last 3 paragraphs of that letter that you conveyed on to Mr. Nifong.
Well, we were trying to sum up, kind of desperately trying to sum up the evidence that we believed supported Dave's innocence and the problems that we believe existed with the evidence that we knew up to that point in time being the only evidence that the state would establish that he was guilty. So Joe was trying to, or Mr. Cheshire was trying to summarize that in as succinct a way as possible and say, please do not indict our client. He didn't do anything wrong. But if you do, please at least allow him to be afforded the same opportunities that Mr. Seligman and Mr. Finnerty had been afforded after their indictments, which was, bonds and being able to turn themselves in.
Okay. And can you just read the last sentence on page 3 of that letter, Mr. Cheshire's letter to Mr. Nifong?
But again, we strongly urge you to refrain from pursuing charges against Dave, and as always, our offer still stands for you to speak to Dave Evans or to us about these issues at any time.
And did Mr. Nifong ever at any point take Mr. Cheshire up on his offer to personally interview Mr. Evans before he indicted?
No.
Did Mr. Nifong or the police officers ever at any point request information or request an interview of Mr. Evans that was refused?
No.
After this letter, did you receive a report, another report from on the DNA testing?
Yes, by DNA security.
Okay. Can you look at Exhibit 214, please?
Yes.
About which there was testimony yesterday.
Yes.
Was this the first report you had received as to any results regarding the testing at DNA security?
Yes.
And did you receive it on or about May 12, 2006?
Yes.
Date of the report.
I think, as I recall, we received it very, very late in the afternoon, somewhere around 5 o'clock.
Okay. What was your understanding of this report concerning your client, Dave Evans?
Well, it certainly, the first page of it refers to the fact that DNA security had concluded, and I have to be honest with you, I didn't understand much when I first got it.
Okay. Can I? You said the first page. Are you looking at page 1, or are you actually looking at
I'm
page
sorry,
5?
the first substantive page of it.
Okay.
It would be page 5 of the
All right.
DNA security report.
Okay. I'm sorry, you can continue. I just wanted to make sure.
I didn't really know that much, and really nobody on the defense, no lawyer on the defense team knew that much about DNA or necessarily how to decipher all this stuff. But what I could conclude is that they were part of what that they had basically only found DNA on 3 evidence items, is what I took from this report. and that one of those evidence items was a collection of plastic fake fingernails that were found in a trash can in Dave Evans' bathroom